Hello and happy Friday, my friend.
Happy Friday, Carlos. How are you today?
Very good. Ready to go back home and
That's
traveling this
good.
week, but still had to finish a couple of things. It's cold where I'm at. I'm not in Florida. It's cold. It's where I'm up north. I'm closer to you.
I know. Well, you say it's cold, but as we are here, late in the week in the Boston area, at least it's like 50 today. So that for us in this time of year is warm. It's like t-shirt and shorts weather.
I think that is close to the 40s here in Norway and Connecticut. So I don't know why you're getting warmer weather than being here. Probably you're sending me all your cold weather, so I'm freezing here.
Well, you'll be fine when you get back to Florida, but yeah, it's been a good week. I think everybody recovered from the Super Bowl festivities on Sunday. At least
Did
for
you
those in the
win?
United States who, no, I didn't go, but just staying up to watch the game. But, I didn't have a team in it this year. Like we're used to having the Patriots in it for many years. I'm very spoiled and so are my kids. Like, they've grown up with having the Patriots and, Red Sox and other Boston teams, very successful and much hated across the country. But, it was nice to watch other people's teams play this time and enjoy that game.
It was interesting because like I sit down with my wife to try to watch it, and she's Brazilian. So football for them is completely different than our football. So she looks a little bit and then she goes to her phone. And she looks a little bit and go back to her phone. And I'm like, babe, I know what a first down is. That's it. The rest, I know that they're trying to move the ball. And we're joking about it. But it was a very interesting game. When she picked, I'm going to attribute it that if anybody hate the winners, it's based on my wife. Because as soon as I say, babe, who's going to win? She said, the blue ones. And they want to make a touchdown. I'm like, what? How do you
All the
not?
superstitions, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to sit in a certain place. You can't get up during different times. Everybody's got their superstitions for their team. So yeah, it's definitely her. Either she gets the credit or she takes the blame for it, right?
There was an interesting ad. I have to look at it. I keep saying that I'm going to look for it. It had a QR code changing colors.
Yeah,
And I'm like,
Coinbase.
all of a sudden I'm looking at it and I'm like, literally, I'm looking at the QR code and I'm like, that's a cool idea. And it's moving and like, it looked like Pong. And I kept looking at it and I didn't pick up my phone. By the time that I pick up my phone, I'm like, oh, wait, I need to pick up my phone. It finished. I'm like, but it
It was
wasn't.
useless anyway because they spent. I think the number is something like for the 30-second ads, it was going for like $16 million or something like that. So they spent that much money to put the colorful QR code. So think about from just a technology, as we talk about a lot, obviously on this conversation. Only certain people are going to recognize that as a QR code, and the fact that they can pull out their phone and hold it up and take a quick scan and then tap to follow it. So we did, right? And it was a Coinbase ad. So the idea was if you quickly take advantage of it, I think they were going to put a certain amount of Coinbase, crypto or money to buy crypto into your account if you started it up. But the website and the app crashed right away. So they spent $16 million, right? Think about scaling in the cloud, right?
Yeah.
Infinite resources, you're right. You got cloud elasticity. It's one of the big benefits of the cloud. Yet they didn't scale up and anticipate the number of people that were going to hit the app and hit the website. And then they lost all that, So instead of it being a positive and people being excited and getting a bunch of new signups, they had a bunch of people who were just sitting there scratching their heads, like, why did I just do that?
Is that so? It's interesting because in that, so the cloud has a capability to scale, but it
Mm-hmm.
need to hit a threshold. It's almost impossible for you to detect a threshold that you're gonna scale your app in under 30 seconds.
Right.
They just needed to, okay, they know at what time their ad gonna appear because that's what
Yeah.
they pay. Also, depending on where you ad appear, you pay. So you can actually preset those scale sets or availability sets depending on what cloud you're going for, and have them. Okay, let me scale this big. Even though, like,
Yeah.
if I spend $60 million, I can probably spend 25K receiving for the infrastructure for an hour,
Yeah.
and then bloop, bring it down.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's all about the planning, right? And that's just a lot of what we talk about here, right? We talk a lot about cybersecurity, but a lot of it has to come back to planning and kind of what you can do to be proactive so that if and when something happens, you have done as much as you can to prepare for it. And not everybody's going to run a Super Bowl commercial, but a lot of people need to prepare for things like the potential for ransomware attack, right? And I think that's what we're going to get into and talk about today. So, kind of continuing the football news, there was a story that came out just after the Super Bowl that the San Francisco 49ers football team has now been hit by ransomware. So there's an organization called, or it's the Byte ransomware attack. And it's kind of some known issues and exploits with this attack, but essentially the 49ers. And I saw some news early in the week. I haven't seen the updates on kind of what's happened since then, but the FBI did go ahead, as well as the Secret Service, and issue an alert and some steps that people should follow to kind of prevent themselves from being in this kind of attack. So that's something I think we can dig into a little bit here. But
yeah, and I think that before we even go there, it may sound like a broken record. And in the description of this video, on this live, you can see those. But it's interesting how many people and organizations keep getting hit with the same basic
yeah,
security holes that they should have prevented or protected long time ago. I think that's something important because for an enterprise, they may have
mhm,
a centralized team that is doing all this thing, but then
yeah,
for others that may be smaller organizations that hire some outside consultant or an MSP, um, they try to hire someone because they are bringing those services. But I think that there are also some common sense that need to be communicated for their environment.
yeah. And it's not something you want to wait until something happens and then just know who to call to kind of help you get out of it. It's the proactive side of things that will help address and kind of prevent these things from happening, or at least reduce the odds of it actually hitting your environment and causing these kind of issues. And I think that's where the cost justification is really difficult in many ways, but what it used to take to kind of harden up your environment and get ready for something like this and prevent it and reduce the attack surface and all this kind of language, uh, it's become a lot more common. The technology that's available, how the tools are implemented and used, the skill set and the people who can administer it, it's a lot more common than it used to be. So the cost of getting ready and being available, so you can run your business, but also do it in a secure and protected way, it's a lot more accessible, I think, than it's ever been before. It's very complex in many ways, right? Because the nature of the attacks. But like you said, most of the attacks that are taking place are exploiting known vulnerabilities. There are still some that come up as kind of brand new zero-day attacks, but a lot of the stuff that's out there is preying upon the fact that software and the administration of it and the updating and the patching, most people don't keep up with it as much as they should, and all they need is a couple of companies each day to kind of leave a port or two open or to click a link in an email, and that gives the hackers enough to work on.
So there are 12 things. And when I was looking at this, I'm like, you know, this is like a 12-step process.
Mhm.
We're gonna go through it, we're gonna share it.
Yeah.
Like the first one, I think that even on a personal level, we should take that into account. And we have talked about it before. But to keep your data protected, your data is your new currency. You have heard me say that. Um, but to have a successful backup, not only once, not only when you put the system the first time, but to have a system, a process that you actually can have repeatable backups that are stored somewhere else. Because that's the interesting thing. A lot of these systems or these infections or ransomware, they actually look for, do they have a backup? And they go and they delete the backup. So the companies or the individual may be taking backups,
Yeah.
but they are not protected in the way that they should. So then that affects their performance later on, because now when you try to recover, you don't have anything.
Right. Yeah, and I think the key about the backups too, in the recommendation, is to create backups that are immutable. So what does immutable mean? Immutable means that once the backup is written, the file cannot be changed. And that's a key, because a lot of what the technique here is, like you say, is the ransomware attack will come in, find the backup, encrypt the backup, or delete the backup, or change the backup in terms of the ownership, right? The user account that has ownership and administrative capabilities over it. So a lot of those things are around that. So if you have it so that it's in a disconnected chain, it's immutable, the backup cannot be changed. Now at least you have something known good to recover once you get through whatever is happening.
And to not only have that, but to ensure that you can also recover. I think that that will be very important, because a lot of times people just look at, oh, it should be working. It worked for a day. It worked for two. I don't check it again. And then I remember one time that someone else was administering a server, and that was a long time ago. And they had the, I don't know if you remember, the white, like, first DLT tapes. Those things make such a big noise. You put it in, and you needed to then, all of a sudden, the backups were not haven't been running for a long, long time. So we don't depend on tape right now,
Mm-hmm.
but the same logic applies.
Yeah.
Are your backups being successful? Do you have a report? Can you see them in a simple console that you can say, hey, if you're a single person, you see your backup. If you're managing for other people, do I have a centralized place that I can see everything?
Right. Yeah, and testing the restoration of the backup is a key piece, and not just testing it once, but testing regularly. Right, to your point, making sure that you have, and this is a feature that's in some products, backup verification, so that it will automate that process. Right, and it could be that it's a screenshot verification, right, that make sure that the system actually boots and that there's a screenshot capture as part of that. So whatever the process is for it, it's a key piece, not just taking it for granted because you think that it runs, or it hasn't generated any alert telling you it didn't. Right, there needs to be a regular process to make sure that it actually is there.
Step number two, I would consider a little bit of a challenge for some people to think about. We're coming into a network and everybody should be sharing everything. But because we don't know who is coming, the concept of network segmentation, it's really important, and it's gonna probably take more, be considered uh, more than before, because I can't trust Johnny that brought his phone to the office. I don't know what he's running on his phone, or someone else's that, even though they have a corporate laptop, they just went to the coffee shop and they did not enable the corporate VPN solution. Or uh, so segmenting the machines, it's gonna become something that will help prevent, because if one machine then is infected, if that machine cannot talk to anybody else, then that infection get contained like a vaccine, or you annihilate one
Hmm.
and that's it.
Yeah, and that segmentation of the network, or the ability to bless you, to isolate, right? So that if something is detected, that the network is intelligent enough to isolate that node, right? That endpoint, whatever that device is, that all of a sudden is demonstrating some abnormal behavior, then is going to help to protect the rest of the network, and to limit the spread of whatever's happening. So um, the design of the network and kind of how it all works, but then also the endpoint security that runs on those devices, because that's another piece we've talked about before here. Is people are on home networks, they're on public networks, and they're on corporate networks. And as you're traversing these different networks, it's important to have the security there to make sure that it's giving us as much control of what's happening there, and again, the ability to isolate those nodes that are creating problems.
I remember, I think when Microsoft released the first version on the NPS, used to be the radio server when they came out. I think that was in 2003, that they came out with then the first version that you can then detect, hey, does this person has an antivirus? If they don't have an antivirus, log them into a separate place, or if they don't have the updated definitions, move them into this separate area. So the technology has been available for a while.
That's
And there
right.
are other vendors that also do it. But actually looking into how you're, like you said, updating your antivirus, but also the operating system. Like sometimes there are apps that thinking that they're doing something cool and innovative, they actually open holes without them knowing. I don't know if you remember, like last year, for a while there was a chatter about Zoom having a web server.
Hmm.
Um, they didn't do it maliciously. They were doing stuff to add functionality into the app, and the developers built it in one way. Then they found out, hey, that may not be the best way. We will fix the functionality and remove the option. That's what the updates do. The updates actually help to keep your system secure. And if you don't do it, and now with even the firmware updates, I'm starting to see stuff on the firmware area. Um, that is a step to manage a fleet. You need a solution, and it doesn't matter at what level, it doesn't matter what you use, you need to use something that will help you manage it. But when you can have these components talk to each other, it actually make your life easier. Huh? What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, and that's, I think, the key piece we've talked about. Again, we're kind of echoing some points we've hit in the past, but remote monitoring and management software that will help with the patch delivery, the antivirus updating, running the checks continuously on these systems as they're awake and kind of on the network, to make sure that we've done all the preps. And then what a lot of it we see too is also the use of VPN software to run that. So if I'm sitting in my home office like I am, before I connect to the corporate network, it's running through a script to make sure that I've got all the necessary requirements before I'm introduced to the network, right? If I'm not, like, I actually had something happen this week where I went to the Okta portal and I was trying to sign into one of our applications, and it was locked and I couldn't get in. And so I opened a help desk ticket and they came back and said, well, you're not on VPN right now. That's why. Okay, right. Yeah, I remember I rebooted my system. I tried to get on VPN. It didn't come up right away. I said, forget it. Right now, here I am later in the day. I couldn't get in. So it's those kind of checks that are very simple little pieces, but it's kind of how all the components work together, again, that requires planning and the system design to make sure that before we're allowing access to corporate systems, people are either on a VPN, got the antivirus running, all the patches and everything's up to date. I got a notification before we got on here to record this that I'm going to have to reboot my PC within 10 hours because I've got a software update that's pending. So it's those kind of things that it's just, people should be used to it as software users, right, and computer users. But it's making sure that, we've got all the policies and procedures in place. The other thing here on my corporate system, if I pull up the Microsoft Store, which is kind of the built-in software store on a Windows computer, it's locked. My system administrator for the company has locked that piece to make sure that I'm not installing extra software, right? If there's something I need, I can go to them and ask for it. But it's to prevent that, another kind of piece to reduce the attack surface.
After doing those basic things, one piece that it actually doesn't get as much love is to review who has access, like the user accounts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is an area that I will raise my hand. There were times that until I didn't implement some technology to actually review it, um, I didn't know who actually, if I had user accounts created that I didn't know. But also, it's important to know what access does that have. So, like, specifically, you may not want or have the tools to do a review of every user that you have on your environment. Or let's say if you're on the cloud or in Office 365, all your users. But there's some specific groups that actually have like higher level,
Mm-hmm.
like super user, global admin, root if it's Linux, wheel that actually make you like root. That is so key because then all of a sudden, if somebody create an account and doesn't do anything, you don't know about it.
Yeah.
But then if they create an account and all of a sudden 3 months later they come in, or 3 days later, or a week later, and they do something, you go, okay, how did they get access to my environment? Well, something happened. And having checks, and there are tools for it. There are tools that actually review your access, automatically notify you when there's a change on permissions. I think that that's really, really important because that is what's gonna save you later on. If you detect someone, like literally, I remember at one company one time early on in my career, after getting out of the U.S. Army, I was administering and I saw a new account, and then all of a sudden I saw it on our domain admin group, and I went and I whack it out, whoop, and then all of a sudden I got a call from the headquarters. Our processes are not working. I'm like, okay, and they're like, we don't have access to your domain. I'm like, yeah, you don't. They're like, why? I'm like, did you ask us permission? Like, we're responsible for this. You came
Yeah.
in through a different way and you grant yourself access? No. So, in that sense, we need to be vigilant on the access that we're responsible for.
Yeah, and sometimes the fun part is taking away access when you discover something like that, and then you wait and see how long it takes before someone comes. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't, right? But that's even, I think, another piece that people need to think about is it's not just your applications and your network devices and those things today. It's also those SaaS applications. So do you have a process when someone leaves the organization where you go take them out of Salesforce, take them out of Microsoft 365, take them out of Azure, wherever it happens to be, to make sure that you're limiting their access, that they don't have the ability to take, kind of intentional deletion of files and records is a problem, especially when people leave, right? Especially if they're upset about how they left. And so having a process by which, it's the joke when you used to go to the office and you use your badge to scan in and it doesn't work and you're like, well, maybe this is my last day, right? Like, but it is kind of having the preparation and the procedures there to make sure that you are, whether it's, scanning in or logging into network or systems or whatever, that when someone leaves, that there is a process by which we remove access to their systems.
Um, the next one is like, we know that we had to have access to the systems.
Mm-hmm.
If you're gonna come in remotely, you need to come in. The time for walking into the data center with a keyboard to touch a KVM box is gone. You
Mhm.
had to go through RDP, you had to go through SSH, you had to go through a number of other ways. But I think that to understand how to restrict or disable it when it's not needed. Simple example. Now on cloud environments, I know of policies that, hey, if you are not working on a server, you don't need remote console. So why should you have the ports open? Or do you need them to have the ports open to the internet?
Mhm.
Let's say a basic security practice is like you should have or a secure jump box or a bastion host or some way that you actually get secure access into the environment. So then you grant access only to that network to access the servers. That could be on premise, I remember a long time ago, or on the cloud. But today, we, by default, because you're building something, they grant you and you say, oh, yeah, give me a public IP address. Yeah, give me RDP or SSH. Well, yeah, I can get access. Done. And then we forget to close them out, even though it has the big red thing saying, warning, do not run this in production.
Oh yeah. Well, another one of my favorites is if you start looking at some of these different attacks that do take place, is people will go ahead and, um, like the hackers will pretend to be technical support from Microsoft or someone else, get somebody to download TeamViewer or things like that, right, and host a remote desktop session, let them in, right?
Yeah.
Thinking that they're some legitimate kind of support. And again, it's another port that's open. It's another access point. And then, how do you prevent those kind of things? Like you can set up your network and your devices in such a way that even if someone installed it, they wouldn't be able to actually operate that software, right, and allow the remote desktop connection. So, um, granted, there are a million pieces of software out there, but there are some common things that we can account for and kind of create a plan to block that access and prevent those ports from being used.
Um, the next one is one that I remember um, having a banner on a system
Hmm.
to let you know, hey, where is this supposed to be used or what is coming specifically on email right now,
Yeah.
is really important and it's extremely easy. And almost every platform for business email has the capability to notify you this email is from outside of the organization. And that will then at least add a little bit of a visual
Hmm.
so that, hey, you may need to pay a little bit of attention.
Yeah. And it's confusing for people sometimes because they're like, why do we need this? Of course, I know it came from the outside. Until you receive a message from one of your colleagues that shows up as coming from the outside. And then it's like, wait a second. Now, sometimes we do things on our phone, right? Where you're like, oh, I just had an idea. Let me send an email to Carlos and tell him about something. And then it accidentally, because of the way my phone is, like my default email might be my Hotmail instead of my work, right? Now, oh, I sent something to you from the outside, right? Could be something like that, or it could be, again, we've seen these attacks where they'll do a social engineering attack. They'll pretend to be someone that you work with because they've done the research, right? They'll pretend to be your CEO and send an email and say, I'm in the middle of a meeting, right, or a conference call, therefore don't call me or bother me. But are you getting this? Because I need some help with something, to get you to then respond back and say, oh, of course, right? Don't want to be like, jump right on it because it's the CEO. Now, what if that came in though with the external warning, even though it's supposed to be right because they're spoofing the email, right, or they're using a different email? So I think these warnings, people take it for granted, and it starts to become part of what just you expect. But I think why not, right? Why not add that as an email administrator and just kind of provide an additional check to people before you send those emails along to their inbox?
And that also connect with the next one. There are tools that actually can help you disable the hyperlinks or review those hyperlinks before coming in. So you know, hey, this email came from the outside. And by the way, we review the content of this email, because for us or for the end user, it may look just like a text email.
Hmm.
But we know that in today's world, it may be HTML, it may be something else. So there may be stuff on the back and executing as soon as you open it. That's why, like, I automatically, on any email client that I have, I automatically disable the preview function,
Hmm.
because long time ago that was one of the options, that the preview, even though you're only seeing the preview, it was technically opening the whole email, so it was executing whatever payload. So I took that as a precaution for myself. But having a solution or having the practice to reviewing your hyperlinks is key in this world right now.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of the consumer email products have some sort of protection to try to do the screening and those things. Obviously, on the corporate side of things, there are advanced threat protection in Microsoft 365. There are third-party add-on products. You can layer them so that there are multiple kind of layers to go through. Because the challenge with a lot of this stuff is some of them look for known threats, known techniques. Very few of the products that are out there now are more zero-day oriented, where they're more AI machine learning based, right? Where it's constantly evolving and looking for new techniques and things that haven't been seen before. And if you're only looking for things that have been seen, and somebody comes up with something new, right, you're caught unaware. So looking for those kind of solutions that anticipate the changing landscape of what's out there is really a key piece. And that looks at some of the software that's out there will detect an email that looks like an Amazon or a Microsoft or a Google or an Amazon Web Service, right? They'll look for those kind of things that look like and mimic it, but then detect the fact that the URL is taking you to a different domain, right? And then they'll intercept and kind of isolate that, isolate the link, isolate any files that are attached to it, right? And kind of put it all in quarantine. So that's a key piece that unfortunately has become more and more necessary, especially for business email.
And in addition to that, something that it it existed for a while is having double or multi-factor
Mhm.
authentication. um, because, like, knowing a password, having, let's say, the hackers use the rainbow tables. The first time that I heard about the rainbow tables, I'm like, is there a rainbow, something like that? um, and then when I started digging into it and leveraging them, I'm like, oh wow, this is interesting. um, but when you have multiple layers, you guess the password or you got the password, but now you don't have, let's say, a physical token or a multi-factor token or some other layer, or you say you only can execute this authentication from this location when you meet this criteria. Adding those layers, I know that is a pain. They're a pain, but at the end of the day, they maintain the security of the environment.
Right. It's kind of like, if you're looking at home security, you think about how many locks or alarm systems or cameras and those kind of things. And it's like you're just trying to create enough of a challenge that the criminal, in this case, the hacker, will move on and target someone else, right? Unfortunate as that is to say, that's the reality of kind of the world that we're in. So if you're doing multi-factor authentication, um, doing a code to the mobile device, doing a hardware-based token, something like that, there are many ways to do it using the authenticator apps. Right, there's a lot of different ways to handle this. That's where companies like Okta have done really well, right, and kind of putting their different systems in place. So it is still an important piece. People do things like use the same password on every single website that they log into. So that's where using maybe a password manager like a LastPass or something like that, or 1Password, right? Like you've got to have some tools in the toolbox there, because users left to their own devices are going to use that same password on every single website. So if it's get, you know, stolen from one property, we had like Disney Plus. My password had been, used for something, and then Disney Plus, all of a sudden I lose my account. They locked me out of it. and never got it back. Went through a whole big thing. Basically, I ended up paying for some hackers Disney Plus subscription for a year on that one, right? Shame on me. I reused the password. But that's all it takes. And once they're in, it's very hard to undo.
And that's what then this next one, auditing what you have on your account. As a vendor, you need to run an audit on all your accounts. As an individual, you should run an audit on your accounts. The simplest way, I think that right now, almost every browser, when you open it, if you go to the settings, it tells you so many passwords that you have saved are compromised. Change them. If you use a tool, you can change them. But if you're on an enterprise, if you're on a small business, you should run an audit. Hey, have we changed these passwords in the last 90 days, the last year? When was the last time that we changed this password? I know that, again, it's a hassle, but that should be part of the service. Because if all of a sudden you have 10 different services that you use and you have never changed their passwords, and that password get compromised, you're gonna lose access to all of them when something happens.
Yeah, and that's where I think, for individuals, things like LastPass, it has a security audit feature where it'll go through all your passwords and tell you which ones are weak, which ones are reusing the same password over and over again, which ones have been in use for a long time without being changed. And it will prompt you to kind of do that. On the corporate side of things, obviously, you can implement that password policy that's going to force the user to change their password every so often, to not reuse passwords, to use them of a certain complexity, right? And kind of characters, upper, lower numbers, those different things. So, yeah, it's always frustrating for the users. They don't like to change their password. They'd really prefer to just keep it the same. But we know this is again, um, if it gets captured. I mean, I just got another notice this week from a company saying we had a data breach. Your information, your username and password was taken, and those kind of things. We've changed your password, right? Basically, they've locked us out. You got to do a reset. It happens to all of us every week. So, in the corporate environment, again, is a big concern, and but it's pretty manageable, right? There are tools that are effective in doing this.
Last but not least, is you need to make sure that from all your systems, you feed those events, those alerts to a centralized location so you can do analytics, security monitoring, because at the speed that things are happening, there's no human possible that can look at all those logs. That's a reality. But computers, on the other hand, can detect patterns.
Hmm.
So if all of a sudden you're seeing that your workstations are getting hit with RDP logins when the workstations or the servers don't have RDP enabled, or if all of a sudden there's another port that is getting hit, or if all of a sudden you're seeing a lot of traffic getting generated, hey, something is happening. Um, let's take an alert. There's systems that actually do that, and that can then you can say, oh wait, there's an infection. Do I have a system? Oh, our automated system detected that there was a new patch, there was a vulnerability, it went out and it blocked that. That's where you saw all this traffic, all this. Now we know what it is. But if you don't have that, then you're going to have some challenges later on.
Yeah, that's one of the things we see in the Internet of Things is you've got a million systems out there generating billions of bits of data and log files and all these things happening. Having a console that knows how to consume all of that kind of information plus everything that comes through desktops and all your other endpoints, and be able to process it and then kind of identify what are those key signals that something is about to happen or starting to happen, and how do we prevent and isolate it, feeding that back in so that a skilled analyst can sit in front of it and then take action based on what the system is monitoring for. It's important. So it's great that we've got all these internet connected devices and appliances and desktops and servers and everything out there, but it just means there's even more and more information to comb through. And so having a console that really is designed to monitor and alert is a really critical piece.
Yeah, so those 12 steps, make sure that you click the link below. And our idea, my friends, is that we can keep you up to date of what is happening and have a conversation. So first thing that we want you to do, in all the platforms that you're seeing, click, subscribe, and share. Not leave it just for you. Share with your team, share with other people. Drop us a note, drop us a comment. What topics do you like? What would you like to see? Uh, our whole idea is that we can keep adding value to you in the tech world and that we continue to grow together. My friends, Mike, has been awesome to see you again. To everybody else, we hope to see you here next week, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, in Tech Conversation Secrets. See you, my friends.